when preparing for today, I bumped into this concept that you wrote about integrity, and that's candor and equanimity. So I had to look up that word, equanimity.
Yeah, it sounds like me. Let's just put it like it sounds like me.
So that really interested me. Why do you think that that's something that you have to deal with in later stages in life?
Yeah, well, despair is part of integrity. And I think it's just denial if there is not mixed with integrity some sense of despair. Despair that it's going to be over. Despair of what has been lost. Despair of people who have been lost, which is, of course, that's the biggest loss. Equanimity. I don't know if I said equanimity. I guess for myself, I guess equanimity would be a goal, but for myself, I've always been too passionate a person to really consider myself equanimous or having equanimity. There's just too much going on inside of me for equanimity. Maybe it's a stage to be achieved. Maybe that's something I could strive toward. I don't know.
Okay, so while people trickle in for the first minute or so, before introducing our esteemed guest, I would like to welcome everyone with an effusive hello. And my name is Elli Schachter. To those who don't know me, I'm the current president of ISRI. That's the International Society of Research on Identity. Some of you might know this as SRIF. We were formerly the Society for Research on Identity Formation, but the name was changed to give us more of an international flavor. And I'm so excited to celebrate the inauguration of this ISRI Webinar series, which is something new. There will be more meetings, not too frequent. We don't want to burden people, but enough to keep us all on our toes between conferences. The meeting is being recorded for those who couldn't get here and for posterity. And just the speakers and those asking questions at the end are recorded, hopefully. So the rest of you don't have to worry about that. I want to thank my university, Bar-Ilan, for giving me the Zoom platform. Okay. So what could be a better way to kick off our ISRI seminar series than with Professor Jim Marcia? And thank you so much for joining us. I'm so happy and excited and honored. And right after the June Tilburg conference, Alan Waterman, who was kindly joining me as the co-host, suggested that we start off by interviewing Jim, and I told him that was exactly what I had in mind. And so thank you, Al, for helping me get this series started. And thanks for
carrying coals to Newcastle.
Okay, I don't think 99% of the participants need me to introduce you, but for Mr. Recording and for Mrs. Posterity, I'm going to just say a few words. Jim is undoubtedly the founder of our academic field. He's the first one to take Erikson's theoretical work and formulate ways in which to empirically study it. The paradigm he introduced in the 60s, the ego identity status paradigm, is with us till today. It spawned thousands of studies and dissertations. His model is in every introductory psychology textbook that studies development. So well known that some of my colleagues think the four identity status were developed by Erikson himself. And it's like the two were combined. A few dates in his career milestones, the dissertation on ego identity was published in 64. And in 68, the first article was published, and then Jim started at Buffalo, right? And then 30 or more years at Simon Fraser University, and famous chapters we all cite so many times, the handbook chapter on identity in adolescence in 1980, and the 1993 ego identity book, a handbook for psychosocial research, which he edited with Alan and Sally and others. And so many more studies, handbooks, and seminal chapters followed. And more than just identity, Jim also studied other aspects and stages of Erikson's lifespan model, which we will hopefully get into today. And he's an active psychotherapist and has written also on psychotherapy. And he also plays the trombone, and I am truly envious.
Of the trombone.
The trombone, yeah.
Yeah.
No, the psychotherapist I'm not envious of.
Envious of the trombone.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us. And we thought that we might start out in a personal vein. And in the opening chapter of your handbook in 1993, you wrote that many before Erikson have studied identity, but he was the first to embed it into a developmental framework and give it a psychological, developmental, integrative, structural task. So I thought that perhaps in order to understand your study of identity, you could take some time to share a bit about how identity meets your own developmental story. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to share some of your own background, your family, your upbringing, your own adolescence, your emerging adulthood. How did you form your identity? Why do you think identity in Erikson's theory resonated with you? So that's a big question, but that's where I wanted to start.
Wow, that's a big question.
Yeah.
Well, I grew up in the Midwest. My father's parents came from Sicily. They were immigrants. My mother's parents were German and from Ohio, northeastern Ohio. I was, pretty much a Midwestern boy. I grew up in Columbus, played a lot of tennis, went to Wittenberg, went through about 3 or 4 different majors, English and history, and then psychology. How does it relate to, I don't think I chose it. I chose identity for other reasons. When I was on internship at Mass Mental Health Center, one of those training hospitals for Harvard Medical School, on my internship from Ohio State, we had a guy that came through, 16-year-old kid, came through with a diagnostic request, and my supervisor was Dave Gutman. So we did the testing, and the guy did things on the tests that, that looked like a thought disorder, but six months later, he was out of the hospital. And that just doesn't happen usually with somebody with a thought disorder. So Dave Gutman, who was TAing for Erikson at Harvard at the time, suggested that I read Erikson. He was TAing for him, and I did. And it really opened my eyes, because my connection with psychoanalytic theory before had been Fenichel, who was whose text was pretty turgid, and psychoanalytic language was pretty patient distant. But when you read Erikson, it was really much more experience near. And that was really an eye-opener. I had to do a dissertation at Ohio State, so I thought that would be something that would make the dissertation interesting and be worthwhile working on. And that's why, and identity was his most important construct as far as I could see. So that's why I chose identity.
Mm-hmm.
More story.
So do you think that you had an identity crisis?
Oh, that was singular.
Yeah.
I went through enough majors in college. Yeah. I certainly had an identity search, and that counts as a crisis.
What was it like when you took your early psychology courses?
At Wittenberg?
Yes.
Al, you remember Monroe calculators?
Yes, I do.
I'll bet you. What was it like? I think what intrigued me, it was something in the intro-psych text about hypnosis. And that kind of piqued my interest. And then as I took more courses, it just got more and more interesting to me. And the idea that there was a possibility of being scientific about such a field as psychology, that was appealing too. Especially since I went through my last major after English and history was philosophy. And, it got a little bit tiring after a while, sitting through endless seminars with questions, but no answers. Psychology seemed a way of testing the truth about ideas. That was really appealing to me.
Yeah. That's interesting. One of the things that I have been doing in my career is mining philosophy to ask questions in psychology.
I know you have. And well done.
Thank you. Yeah. When you started out to do to study identity scientifically, you had developed both an interview and a paper and pencil sentence completion instrument, but not a scale, not the kinds of scales that have subsequently developed. How did you go about deciding how you wanted to study identity?
It was such a complex construct that I didn't think there was any way of getting at it with a paper and pencil questionnaire. I knew
That's an old technology.
Yeah, right. Oh boy. I knew I was going to have to talk with people. And that seemed also consistent with Erikson's approach. He was a psychotherapist, a psychoanalyst. And I knew that was going to be the way I had to approach it. Although God knows it certainly is labor intensive.
Yeah, besides being labor intensive, probably it in that period of time when qualitative instruments were unheard of, and coding and things like that, to sort of come with an open-ended or not completely open-ended, but open interview, and to talk to people was something quite I don't know exactly what the word would be, but
Innovative.
innovative.
Risky, time
Yeah,
consuming.
yeah,
Did it
Oh,
get through easily?
it was a lot of hard work developing that manual and
yeah.
getting scoring reliability. Uh, and of course, Al and Sally were instrumental in running workshops at adolescent uh, conferences and identity conferences. So it was a lot of work developing that scoring manual and interview and getting
Mhm.
reliability.
Yeah.
Uh, on the other hand, uh, people seem to enjoy doing identity research. It gave them a chance to talk with subjects. And I think most of the people that did identity research based on the interview, and as arduous as it was, enjoyed the process.
Hmm. I know that you had so many graduate students who you at Buffalo who you were doing their dissertations with you at the time. That it was really the buzz of the department that at Buffalo.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was really lucky. I had a lot of, uh, well, the truth is, I had a lot of Jewish fathers. I
Hmm.
had them at Ohio State and I had them at Buffalo.
Hmm.
And they, I, they were really supportive and I appreciated that a lot.
Hmm.
Um, I remember when I was at Ohio State and I was in a research seminar with Julian Roeder and I
Hmm.
presented research. And after I presented the possibility of the research, I got a lot of feedback. I got a lot of feedback. And I remember going out with Roeder for a beer afterwards with the research team. And he said, well, you really got bloodied, didn't you, Marcia? I said,
Hmm.
yeah. And then uh, when then a good friend of mine at who was a fellow graduate student at Ohio State took me aside after a presentation and he said, well, Jim, he said, you did a pretty good presentation, but I think you should give up this research because I don't think it's going to go anywhere. And I didn't. Um, but it it wasn't exactly rockets going off
Hmm.
when when I tried to put all that stuff together as a graduate student.
So, yeah. Yeah.
But here we
Looking
are.
back on it, oh, looking back on it, would you have done anything differently about getting the research off the ground on identity?
No, Al, I really wouldn't have. I worked pretty hard, and I don't think I could have worked any harder. And I don't think in the beginning I would have done anything differently. I might have chosen more felicitous names for the identity statuses, but I mean, Erikson talked about a psychological moratorium, and he
Hmm.
talked about identity confusion at one time and diffusion another. And it seemed to me that diffusion captured it better than confusion. Uh, and he talked, well, so he had the terms diffusion, moratorium, and people foreclosing identities. So
Mm.
felicitous or not, and capitalistic or not, that's the way those statuses got made.
Hmm.
I
So I
wanted to,
might have chosen better names
Yeah.
anyway, out of the realm of banking.
I
Okay.
wanted to ask you about sort of the formation stage. You wrote somewhere that one of the reasons for the status model was to try and get at observable processes. and that Erikson's concepts were in a way sort of maybe too fluid, or he wasn't academic or precise, or I don't know exactly what word to use. Maybe also because he was a psychoanalyst and he came from a background that speaks of the unconscious. And he said that identity is partly part of the process is unconscious. And here you are studying philosophy and saying, how do we study this scientifically? And you want to take a look at observable processes, and that's where the exploration and commitment come in. But there's this tension, and I'm wondering how you view this tension today between this scientific and observable study of identity and you as the psychotherapist who I think somewhat psychodynamically oriented recognizes that there are unconscious processes.
They're unconscious processes. Yeah. I don't think there's it sounds like a dialectic, but I think that that a possible synthesis is George Kelly and looking at constructs. Okay, I just lost my train of thought because I was thinking of something else. I'm sorry. Can you ask the question again?
I was asking about the unconscious processes versus versus the observable constructs of exploration and commitment.
Yeah. I don't think the identity statuses get at the unconscious processes, but I think what we did is that once we had the statuses, we looked at dependent variables like regression in the service of the ego, like different psychosexual developmental stages. So we kind of backdoored it, and constructs that had origin in a theory about unconscious processes became dependent variables for the identity status constructs. So we related identity statuses to those constructs that had a basis in theory that had postulating unconscious processes. But we never looked at that as defining characteristics for the identity statuses. They appeared dependent variables. That's a answer.
Yeah. Related to the unconscious processes, one of the things that I remember in doing identity interviews and in scoring identity interviews, that I did not always believe what individuals were saying, and not that it was a matter of conscious deception on their part, but they thought they were committed to a goal or a belief or whatever. And I heard the way they described it. And I remember one question very clearly. How willing do you think you'd change your plans if something better came along? And suddenly I heard a snap of the fingers and said, oh, I could change just like that. And okay, they may have said that they were committed to something, but that commitment kind of dissolved when there was any pressure put against what they were saying.
Yeah, that was the advantage of the interview. And you'd never get that with the questionnaire, because that query, that skepticism, that questioning, you can only do with an interview. And that was a way of getting at some of the things, not the unconscious, but maybe in analytic terms, maybe the preconscious, things that they really hadn't thought about. Not that people were dissembling, but that there was something underneath what they were saying, which is what you were picking up. And that's why you could use an interview to probe that. That was the beauty of the interview. But of course, you had to have interviewers that were savvy and sophisticated. I mean, wasn't something that just anybody could pick up and do well. They could do it because the questions were there, the manual was there. But to do it well, they had to have some training in looking beneath. That looking beneath is kind of an important concept.
Do you think I mean, this research started in the 1960s, and there's been all sorts of cultural changes that have occurred since then. To create a identity interview or a methodology, other methodology for studying identity now, how do you think it would be different from what you got started with in the 1960s?
Well, I'd have to take the whole thing with social media, which is identity doesn't get formed. It needs a confirming context. It just doesn't get formed in a vacuum. It gets formed in reflection with other people. And the audience that one has now with social media, realistic or not, whatever reality is, realistic or not, the audience is not just the folks you go to school with, but the people that you are online with. And it's much broader, and it's much easier to be who you're not. And it would have to take into account somehow the role of social media. Don't ask how. I don't know how to do that, but I know it would have to do that.
Do you recall Ken Gergen's concept of the saturated self?
I recall
that responsiveness to other people, that we're constantly that identity has become performative, and you're referencing social media in that regard, so that in essence we wind up playing different roles depending on who it is that we are interacting with at the moment.
Sure. I think the roles and people's response to them are important information for identity formation, but roles are different from identity. Identity is who one truly believes oneself to be. And you could get at that with an interview by asking people to differentiate between their online presence and who they feel they really are, or who they are with the people that mean the most to them. But you'd have to make a differentiation, and you could do that in an
interview. And you think that's still there? In other words, that essence is still there, even though youth are growing up in such a saturated social media that we're not just performers, diffused performers.
I believe that. Yeah, it's hard to be just a performer with your best friend or with someone that you really love, um, or even with your parents. So it's hard to be just a performer there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they'll call you on it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's good to hear.
I guess that's a whole value set that
Mm-hmm.
there should be a sense of oneself that's independent of just how you can make people respond to you.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wanted to sort of segue from here on to the lifespan model itself, because identity is often studied in ways that are sort of divorced from the rest of Erikson's model. And I know that you were also interested in the other stages, and not
Yeah,
only in the stages, but how the conflicts that supposedly belong to one age or stage are relevant to other ages and stages as well. So I'm wondering what you think about the lifespan model itself today, and and perhaps you can tell us a bit about your research on that.
I I think as long as we have bodies, um, I don't know what will happen with AI. That's a whole other kettle of fish. Uh, but as long as we have bodies, uh, I think that the lifespan model will be applicable and useful because each stage is body based. Now, at when I should be doing something about integrity, I'm really aware that of how much of my own identity um, was physical. And when that starts to uh, disintegrate, then you really become aware of
Mm-hmm.
how important a body is in terms of identity. Each of those stages of Erikson's has a body base to it. The other stages, you ask about the other stages. Well, Jay Orlowski developed the intimacy interview, and Cheryl Bradley developed generativity, and Simon Hearn developed integrity, and Andrea Coas developed industry. So all of those were measures of the succeeding stages.
Mm-hmm.
But it was their research.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find it useful to think of when you talk to people and patients and others to think through the model? Do you still use it?
It's like it's in the background. It's
Mm-hmm.
always in the background, and sometimes in therapy it emerges directly. Um, like someone may be doing just fine in their job and just fine in relationships, but then the question comes to me, say they're 45, 50, where's the generativity? And sometimes there's a hole in their lives, and that's what would fill it, some opportunity to mentor, some opportunity to um, care for the life cycle stages of people younger than they are.
Mm-hmm.
So to answer the question, try to answer the question.
Yeah.
It's always in the background. It's a part of me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I had the experience not too long ago of a reviewer on a manuscript in which I had cited Havikhurst and Erikson, asking why I was using models that were developed 40, 50 years ago. And my response to the reviewer was, theories do not come with expiration dates. And
The
find
beautiful.
myself, I find myself thinking in Ericksonian terms um, uh, uh, when I see a lot of the research that's currently being done that doesn't necessarily on well-being particularly that
Yeah.
does not necessarily cite Erikson.
Yeah. Psychology kind of rolls over every 20 years with a new focus. Oh, this is what's important. And I like your phrase.
Yeah.
They don't have expiration.
Yeah.
When you think back at Eric's model and your work with it, do you think that there are other gems hidden inside the theory that you're sort of sorry that we haven't developed, researchers?
Oh, well, a real challenge would be to develop measures of trust, autonomy, and initiative. And that's not easy to do. So, to my knowledge, that hasn't really been done. I think Steve Imber tried to do something with trust, but trying to measure that with college students, as he tried to do, not easy. So there are at least 3 stages that have gone unmeasured, to my knowledge. But that would be a real challenge. I mean, if you can measure attachment, and that's really related to trust. So you could probably, I think it could be done. Those are gems, sort of.
If you were developing a concept of well-being within an Ericksonian framework, what would you highlight?
Well, two ideas come to mind. One is, of course, the positive resolution of the stages. But the other, I think, is a sense of identity. I think that sees you through the inevitable changes, the inevitable physical changes, the social relational changes. It gives you a perspective and a place to stand and a sense of wholeness. And if you have that, and then I think you increase I don't think it guarantees well-being, but I think it increases the probability. It's a hedge against disintegration.
Yeah.
And that's what makes possible things like joy. If you have that solid internal structure, it doesn't guarantee well-being, it doesn't guarantee joy, but increases the probability of it.
I was wondering if getting back to the beginning, and if you'd be willing to share a little bit about your journey yourself into the later stages, and how you feel that issues of generativity and issues of integration versus despair, like the last stages in Erikson's model. What can you share about these issues with us?
Well, I think I'm an old man, and for someone for whom physicality has always been important, it's kind of a niggling daily sense of loss. I get out of breath. I can't lift what I used to be able to lift. So what is there that still remains? And I guess one thing that remains that I didn't talk about with identity, and I wish I had, is a kind of way of being with the world, of being in the world and with the world. That was a good slip, a way of being in the world and being with the world. And that has both a sense of acceptance, but not necessarily resignation. Being and doing what I can, and not dwelling too much on what I can't. I'm really lucky myself. This is just personal. I'm really lucky myself with music. In a couple of symphonies and playing in a big band, and that's really occupied my life. And I'm fortunate that my embouchure has not collapsed by now, and and not just what I can do, but a sense of being valued. So this contributes to a sense of being valued, and I'm just so fortunate. No, I'm not going to wax on about that, but also being valued as a musician, that's fortunate. My wife is really important, and being valued by Janet, that's important. By my kids. I don't know. That's waxing more than I wanted to. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. Given the importance of music in your life now, I was a little surprised that you didn't talk about it when you about its role earlier in your life.
Yeah, well, I was going to go into music, talk about identity crises, which I think Elli asked about before. I was going to go into music, and then at 17, I was in a competition in Columbus, Ohio, for a scholarship to Tanglewood. Came in second. I'm sorry?
What's Tanglewood, for those of us?
Yeah. Tanglewood is a music school and venue for the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Lenny Bernstein was a big wheel in Tanglewood. And so I was in a competition for a scholarship. No way my family could have afforded me to go there. And I came in second to a cellist in the competition. And so I had to sit down and take a long, hard look at stuff. And I decided, not over a period of time, that I had more brains than talent, and that music was not going to be a good choice, given how hard I would have to practice and maybe end up playing second trombone in the Fort Lauderdale Symphony nothing against the Fort Lauderdale Symphony,
Mhm.
but not what I wanted. And so I had to decide to lay that aside for a while, which is
But
what
then
I
it
did.
came back.
Yeah, then it came back. Well, I kind of put myself through the first couple of years of undergraduate school, partly playing dance band stuff. So I made some money, not a lot. And then in around 1995, I picked up the horn again.
Mhm. And you found venues in which to express that.
Well, I was lucky. I picked up the horn. I don't know, why are we talking about music? I picked up the horn and started to practice. And I auditioned with the guy that was the principal in the Gordon Cherry, who was the principal in the Vancouver Symphony. And he took me on as a student. And that resurrected, re-energized that old career. So that's identity.
We're getting into this because it's like parts of identity that get put aside, and then they can be reintegrated later on.
Yeah. Thanks,
Mhm.
Elli. That keeps it relevant.
Mhm.
That's a thing about when you sort of quit your day job, when you retire, there's a chance to do and be things that you didn't have time for to do and be before. And yeah, so there's life after the day job.
Mhm.
Al, do you want to ask something?
I want to say something. I see Harke, and I just the chance to go to the Netherlands to present the research was the first time that I got to go to Europe to present research. And Harke gave me that chance. Beside all the good identity research he's done. So I wanted to say a thank you when I've got him in front of me, and I can say thank you. Okay, go on.
Do you want to unmute Harke for a response?
Thank you, Jim. It was such a wonderful experience to have you and Dave Matheson and Bob Leeper in Groningen, and we learned so much of it. So I'm so happy that it happened. And while the idea to invite you came within the group of students I was working with, and it was such a brilliant idea, but to be honest, did not expect that you would come. Such a famous man, but you came, and it was wonderful. Thank you.
Mutual.
Very good.
Jim, there was one more thing I wanted to ask before we go and open things to the rest of the people. I sort of, when preparing for today, I bumped into this concept. I think it was yours that you wrote about integrity, and that's candor and equanimity. So I had to look up that word, equanimity. Was that, did you write about that, or did I mix you?
Oh, I can't say I didn't. Yeah, it sounds like me. Let's just put it like it sounds like me.
So that really interested me. Why do you think that that's something that you have to deal with in later stages in life?
Elli, what came before equanimity?
Candor. Candor. I think it's like an honesty and being open and being direct.
Yeah. Well, despair is part of integrity. And I think it's just denial if there is not mixed with integrity some sense of despair. Despair that it's going to be over. Despair of what has been lost. Despair of people who have been lost, which is, of course, that's the biggest loss. Equanimity. I don't know if I said equanimity. I guess for myself, I guess equanimity would be a goal. But for myself, I've always been too passionate a person to really consider myself equanimous or having equanimity. There's just too much going on inside of me for equanimity. Maybe it's a stage to be a king. Maybe that's something I could strive toward. I don't know.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
One more question from me, and that might be for the benefit of graduate students or those just starting out in psychology or research, or even specifically research on identity. What counsel would you give to them based on the experiences in your life?
Please choose something that's personally meaningful to you to do your dissertation on. I know that it's just another hurdle, but you can make it more than a hurdle if you put your heart into it, if it's something that really engages you, and work your ass off. That's what I would suggest. Don't just do another iteration of a parameter of some faculty member.
Great. Okay, so if it's okay with you, I wanted to open up things here, and I'll switch to gallery mode. I suppose everyone can see their own. If there's anyone that wants to chip in or ask or say something, just raise your hand or open up your microphone.
Yeah, I'd like to answer any question anybody has, or respond to any criticism anybody has.
I see. We have Chandra. Hello. You can unmute your microphone and
Awesome. Thank you. Hi. And thank you for this time. I don't even know if I have a really well-formed question, but I've been sitting here thinking about your point about the embodied component of the lifespan development model. And I'm hoping you would say more about that. It's making me think a lot about it's sending me on a few mental tangents. I'm thinking a little bit about intersectionality with ability and disability and ability identity development, but I'm also thinking about the ways that my research focuses on ethnic racial identity using Erikson's model and your model and your theory, and thinking about the ways that our embodied presence informs things like our public regard and our private regard and affirmation, and I've started thinking about the ways that might have been different during COVID when we weren't having the same embodied experiences. especially our teens and our adolescents weren't having the same experiences. So I just hope you would say a little bit more about your thought around the embodied physical component of that process.
Okay, so there are two senses. One is that if you look at Erikson's stages, each of them has a kind of a body base. So weaning, breastfeeding, toilet training, sexual or love or power feelings toward parents, cognitive abilities at industry, physiological changes, and puberty, at adolescence and identity, sexual relationships, one way or the other, around intimacy stage, opportunities, conventional opportunities for generativity, having kids, but lots of other opportunities around generativity, and then dealing with physical loss at integrity. So at each of those stages, there's a physical component. And then to the second point, I'm a white guy, and I become aware of that, especially in a that's what people see, especially in a city like Vancouver that has a really large Asian population. And I know if I were in a situation that it were, like if I were living in China, I would have to deal with not just who I've been, but who other people now see me as. And I would have to deal with what does it mean to be a white guy among yellow people. So it's not just that, say, being Black in America, something like that, determines who you are. It adds to what you have to deal with in terms of forming an identity. And what's important is not being, say, Black, but what you do with it, what you make of it. Just like I don't have to worry about what I make of being a white guy in a white society, but I'd have to worry about it if I were in a Black or a yellow society. That would have to be part of what I would have to deal with in terms of my identity. It wouldn't determine my identity, but it would be a component I would have to integrate, struggle with, deal with.
I see that someone named Claire wanted to ask something.
Hello, and I apologize. I'm halfway commuting home on my bicycle, and I realized the camera was on as I was pulling my helmet off.
You're not riding, right?
Yes, yeah, I'm not riding. I'm stopped.
Yeah,
yeah,
okay.
you can see I'm stopped. I figured I shouldn't ask a question while I'm biking along. I'm not quite that good at multitasking.
Yeah, go on.
So I really appreciated you talking about studying things that you're passionate about, because that's one of the things that I did. It was funny. I was thinking about that earlier today, that do we all just choose topics to study that we're interested in? And so the thing that I have found myself studying is established adulthood, this period from 30 to 45. So we've just newly conceptualized this as a period of development. And so one of the things that actually brought me to this talk is I was really blown away with how much identity development is still happening during this age period. And largely because there's these huge world shifts, right? You're spending time, you probably now have a long-term romantic relationship. if you choose to have children, first of all, you're making decisions about whether or not to have children. And if you choose to do that, all these demographic changes mean that now you're raising young children during this age period. And it's also the period of your life where you're trying to get ahead at work and climb that career ladder. And so I was curious to hear what you might say about identity development during this age period of 30 to 45.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, there's the theoretical answer that every stage occurs at every other stage. So there's an identity issue at generativity, and probably having a kid. Look, you're riding your bike someplace, and so one of my first thoughts is, okay, I hope she's stopped. And I don't know if I would have thought that at all when I was 25 or 28 or whenever the identity stuff started. But I've had some kids, and once that happens, you go so quickly into protective mode and caring mode, and it's almost automatic. So that's such a huge shift if in perspective when you have kids, and then balancing that with making a career. You know, you just have to do both. Fortunately, you've got a lot of accrued psychological capital going into that. Hopefully, you've got all those resolved stages, plus you've got an identity that you can carry into that stage with you, so that you're equipped internally, structurally, psychologically equipped to handle both of those things, to handle the kids and the career. But it's an identity issue, and it's a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I also appreciate your care for me while I'm riding my bike. I like that.
Okay.
Thank you, Claire. I see another hand raised.
My name is Guillem Feixas from the University of Barcelona, Spain, and I am very glad to be here and to hear by the first time to James Marcia. I admire much your work. And I was very surprised by your mention of George Kelly personal constructs, because I have been working with this framework and the repertory grid to study identity for almost 3 decades now. And I found it more interesting than using questionnaires or even other types of interviews, because when we use questionnaires or interviews, we are using basically our theoretical constructs, the ones that come from the theory of Erik Erikson or James Marcia or whoever else. And by working with the repertory grid, I try to investigate in a very careful and systematic way the theory of the person who is in front of me, because we all here have theories or are ascribed to a theoretical model. But the people we are trying to help, the people we are trying to understand, they also have theories. And a central part of their theory is their identity. And this is my way, and I just wanted to share that with you and see what is your opinion. And I was not thinking of doing that in this meeting, but when you mentioned George Kelly, I was very surprised and grateful. And so that's it.
Sure. I will share something with you about George Kelly. He was a professor of mine at Ohio State, I took psychopathology from him. He was on my dissertation committee, and it's thanks to him that I paid attention to foreclosure, because after the orals for my thesis, he said, be sure not to overlook foreclosure because they're going to be important. And he was absolutely right. So you've chosen wisely. I had thought at one time of using the role construct repertory grid as a kind of measure of identity. I decided not to, but you've chosen well.
Thank you. Thank you. And we have developed a way to identify identity conflicts which are not in the discourse or the narrative of the subject. And for that reason, I was even more surprised when you mentioned about George Kelly as a synthesis between the explicit and the implicit or the unconscious, because detecting those conflicts in the repertory grid is some way to access the unconscious through the phenomenological interview that it is the grid. So I was really very surprised for your comment, James, and thank you very much for this further comment about your contact with George Kelly. Thank you very much.
Very interesting. Okay, anyone else? Anyone else?
Ellie, I see Andrea has her hand raised.
Andrea. Hi.
I do. It's just such a privilege to see all these faces sharing in admiration of my life's guru, Jim. I can't speak for anyone else, but I do recognize a lot of the names and the faces, and it's true about the power of the research and the power that you had in giving us a tool, which is the Eriksonian stages, in particular identity, as a life tool. But what made it magic was the way you were always so present in communicating. And you want to talk about ego identity. I mean, yours should be enormous and all-encompassing and bump us all off the screen, but you contain it in a way that allows you to really be there for other people. And it's a phenomenal gift, and it's a gift that keeps on giving. And in addition to a little tinnitus, I do have you in my ear, always. And I just wanted to comment on that because it's so powerful. And I don't know if you remember, but Leora and I once did a tribute to you. And it was, we sat at the foot of the master, a conversation about the wisdom and integrity of James E. Marcia. And supposedly there was also a video that went with it. But the main point was, you're fucking awesome. And you don't make other people pay for that in any way. And I have been exceptionally gifted by having had access to that. We go back to 1980. So we're coming up, I think, to our 44th anniversary, right, of knowing each other. And there are no words, but you're a very magical package. One of the topics Leora and I picked on was that the master is greater than the sum of his parts. That there's an essence and an experience of being with you that has been an amazing gift. And of course, the magic of having that accompanied with your wisdom. I just had to say something because I was kind of imploding. And
We-
I see
we
the
make them
faces on the
laugh.
screen nodding their heads. So
And I'll just add, absolutely, you're a treasure, Jim. I'm so grateful to have had you in my life, influential and wise. And thank you. Thank you.
I didn't pay these folks. Thank you all.
Yeah.
I'll
If
chime
I
in.
can
Me
jump in
too.
really fast, James, is I also compliment you in many, many ways in your research and all the development. And I never had the chance to meet you, but I take your research and many other people's research and actually apply it to young adults every single day in my business. So it is a huge compliment to you as well, and a tribute to get to join you on this Zoom call with so many other people. So that was my compliment as well.
Thank you. I'm glad it's useful.
Wonderful. So I think this is a wonderful note to end with. I also wanted to say how empowering it was that you agreed so readily and were willing to meet me beforehand and to discuss things, and it was all done so with such ease and it was great. It was great. It was really wonderful for me as well. I'm adding here in the chat if anyone is not on our mailing list and wants to get notifications about our subsequent webinars, please copy this down and you can sign up. And we try not to spam people with unnecessary mailings. And I really wanted to thank you all for joining us this evening. It was a wonderful start for us and a tribute to Jim, who we're also appreciative of his work and his kindness and mentorship. And thank you all. Alan, do you want to say something before we?
No, I want to say I probably go back further than anybody with Jim. I remember taking my personality theories course with you. And while I did not do my dissertation with you, I took your research away with me. And once I started teaching at the RPI, your concepts, your methodologies were so in my head that I started doing my research there, and thereby hangs my career as well.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you.
Shalom, Elli.
Thank you. Thank you. Maybe afterwards you'll tell me what you meant by Jewish fathers. I've never heard that one before.
Oh.
So thank you all for joining us. And thank you, Jim, and thank you, Alan, for helping me out here. And we'll see you soon next time.
Very good.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.